Hello and welcome. My name is Brian McAvoy.
And I'm Tim Shank. This is Two Cyborgs and a Microphone. We're not going to bother with the usual introduction that mentions Twin Cities Plus.
Some of you already know the reason. I mentioned on the Dangerous Minds podcast where I did an interview a couple weeks ago. But I'm getting ahead of myself, and we'll dedicate a whole show to the things I'm alluding to right now.
What is important is today's subject, and that's the singularity.
The singularity.
I'm really excited to cover this. We haven't covered it. We've alluded to it in our transhumanism episode. But this is exciting. I mean, if this comes to be, it'll be the only thing that matters for any of us.
I think it's when it comes to be. I don't think many people say it's not going to happen.
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, when you're talking about something that can't be quantified, you have to leave it in an ambiguous term of some kind. So that's the reason I say if, because when you're talking about infinity, to me that's conceptual. The singularity is infinite from our perspective. So that's where it gets a little fuzzy.
Okay, well, let's review the exact definition of the singularity, because I have heard some people just say the singularity is when computers become more powerful than humans. And I mean, like, one computer is more powerful than one human. That means that, like, okay, we've reached this crossing point where now computers will outsmart us. And of course, the other definition I've heard is the one you just mentioned, where technology will increase so fast it'll effectively be infinite.
Yeah. Well, let's back up just a little bit and talk about Moore's law first.
Yes, that's a good place to start.
I'm looking for the original when he first said it. I think it's in a 1965 paper. That's what it says here on Wikipedia. In 1964, Gordon Moore, I don't know what his credentials were, but he was some scholar. He noticed the capability of computing hardware doubles every, I think it's about 2.5 or 3 years. And at the same time, the cost comes down. So he, bringing this concept out into the future, said that there's a point, because it's a doubling, it's an exponential curve, and there's a point when it becomes a vertical acceleration on the charts. So that's Moore's law, and it's amazingly held true since the 60s, even in the face of the limits on silicon transistors and things like that. It seems like our computing power doubles every I don't have the exact number, but roughly 2.5 years.
Yeah, but the fact that it's 2.5 years is remarkable. You imagine the computers we've got now versus 2.5 years ago, and like that's scarily accurate. And for it to be such a short period of time is really cool. This doubling trend is pretty common. I've seen it like in my statistics class. They talked about like the doubling of humanity's population, and they'll say things like, yes, the population of the world will, double within, this certain amount of time. And that time frame is much more than 2.5 years, thank goodness. It also makes it scary, the idea of like, what if we colonize Mars? Well, we'll fill it up real fast.
By that point, I think we would. Yeah. But your point about how fast that occurs is pretty amazing. I mean, doubling every 2.5 years is an insane growth rate.
And at some point, that innovation, we've been just steadily pushing the ability of silicone, like you said. After that, we just had to start getting clever. And with, more people researching this stuff, we have kept with that 2.5 year doubling. At some point, the innovator is probably going to be the silicone itself, improving how it's made.
That maybe, or we are actually up against the limitations of silicon right about now. I've heard news stories, I've read headlines that says we're up against that, but now we're looking at graphene, we're looking at single atom transistors and different components. So we're getting into this nanotechnology that may allow that doubling to continue even beyond what silicon can do. So it begins to look at that rate like a natural law of some kind, because it has nothing to do with the actual material we're using, or let me qualify that. It may not have anything to do directly with the material that we're using for our electronics. It may be just the concept of the capacity of technology itself doubles, which kind of takes it to a different level. From there, then we're gonna go to Ray Kurzweil, while similar to the Singularity, he has a law of exponential returns. And the concept there is that when you use one technology to develop its successor, you also end up with an exponential growth rate. By using the previous version to develop the next, each time you redevelop, you have more power, you have more capability to develop further.
The example that pops to mind when you were talking about that was 3D printers. Some of the very first 3D printers used 3D printed parts because all of a sudden these complex, hard to source, difficult to manufacture parts could just be modeled up, printed, and sent off to the next owner. That is exactly that example of using one technology to develop its successor.
Yeah, that's a great example. So now let's take this to the Singularity. It adds to an exponential growth rate. At some point, if you're charting an exponential growth, the line on that chart of progress becomes vertical or close to vertical, but indistinguishable from vertical, which in this concept means infinite technological power. Infinity is a concept that nobody can actually understand because it does not exist in any of our minds or worlds. So when you talk about infinite technological power, it's essentially...
we reach something that is beyond our comprehension.
Right. Good point. There's a reason I'm bringing this up, Brian. I sent you an article.
What's the title of it so people can search for it?
Okay, this is on MIT Technology Review, and the title of the article is AI Software Learns to Make AI Software.
Exactly what we've been talking about.
Right. One tool is developing its successor. And here's what's crazy. I don't know, there's a number of different, and Google's mentioned, MIT's mentioned, I don't know, it doesn't say specifically who did this first, but it says that there are multiple iterations that had similar results. But I think it was the Google Brain Research Group developed an AI for the purpose of developing an AI to recognize images and language. And what's crazy about this, Brian, is that the AI that was created is better than anything a human has ever created. That's exciting. And here's why it's exciting to me, Brian.
I can think of several reasons. Go ahead.
Well, you know that by the time I read this article, probably by the time it hit the wire, somebody had already started developing an AI to develop AIs to create an AI to develop AIs. So here we start into this kind of spiral of progress where so far we know the AI can create AIs better than humans have ever done it. Mm-hmm. So if an AI creates an AI to develop AIs, the AIs that it creates are going to be better than anything we've ever developed at creating AIs.
Exponentially so.
Exponentially so.
And I just had a thought as you were saying that. So we created a program that created a program. So that kind of makes it like, people refer to their creations as like their children. So the programmers have like grandchildren, grand programs.
Yeah.
Wee little grand programs. And, and they were not raised or, created by the programmers. They were created by an AI. Their parents are artificial intelligences. And that's got to be something. That's so cool.
It is so cool. It is so cool. And it's a little scary, Brian, because this is the technological singularity.
I think this is how it's going to happen.
Well, it's already started. That's
I think it's
the birth.
It started before Moore said anything.
I have the opinion that this whole ball started rolling back when we first used a tool.
Oh, yeah.
That's, I think, the birth of the singularity. This is... finally, well, maybe that was the seed, and it's been in gestation ever since. And as of this article being written, it was born. This is a new sort of life form or intelligence that's better than humans and can procreate better than anything we've ever done. Yeah, it's exciting. And here's where it'll get crazy is the AI that we create like this will create more AIs that are better than itself at creating AIs. And it's a snowball, an exponentially increasing snowball of technology where there's just no way to understand where this is going to land us, Brian.
Right.
There's a lot of people in very important and recognized and scholarly people that have expressed warnings about artificial intelligence.
Oh yeah, I've heard some very top minds. They say that we should be cautiously optimistic, that we shouldn't be afraid of it, but we should be not stupid about it.
I don't agree with that. Well, I agree with that position. I don't agree with the fear that seemed to come along with it. For us to even conceptualize that an artificial intelligence will have a sense of preservation, self-preservation, will have the same urges we have to gather resources or to preserve them or to stay. It's not, to me, that is a human flaw. We've put our drives and fears into something that is totally alien.
Yeah, and you and I even talked about this on our artificial intelligence episode. Exactly this. Here's a thought I had. You were talking about the first time we used a tool as the seed of the singularity. But it seems to me, by the way, I agree with that, but it seems to me that every generation kind of has a singularity. But if you talk to somebody before humans really had language and introduce them to a society that had language, to them that would be technologically overwhelming and they would see progress as virtually infinite. If you talk to somebody from the Stone Age and said, hey, look, we've got metal tools and we can use those metal tools to create other metal tools, to them that would be a technological singularity. So if you introduce somebody who lived around the turn of the century and said, hey, look at your automobiles, we are going to have automobiles in 115 years that are just going to blow these away, and every year we're going to have ones that are more powerful. We're going to have stereos that talk to your phone. We're going to have television sets in the automobiles, and that would just blow people away. They couldn't even imagine what would happen next. And right now we're looking at self-propagating AIs and going, oh my gosh, I can't even. And in 30 years we might be looking at this and going, we're turning the moon into computational material so that we can have a processor made out of our moon, where it's just going to keep that doubling, as we've mentioned. But I think this is our generation's singularity. We cannot fathom what's going to come next any more than a caveman could fathom Bluetooth.
Am I understanding you correctly to say that you think that every generation or every so often people experience something that is exponential as if it's unlimited?
To their understanding. So what I'm saying is that what does Kurzweil estimate the singularity?
I want to say it was 2029.
Okay, I thought I'd heard something like 2040 or something. Anyway,
that could have been in it too.
So he has a ballpark estimate. Imagine 5 years past that. Are we going to look back and be like, oh my gosh, we could not have even thought of where this would end up? And here we are. And I can't imagine what this is going to look like in 20 years. I suspect that's what's going to happen.
Brian, I don't think I agree.
Well, tough shit.
Because, I mean, here's an example. We have cars. I can imagine them flying. I can imagine them hovering. I can imagine them flying upside down. I can imagine them doing all sorts of things that cars cannot do. I think there were probably people back in the early days of cars that could do the same thing that I can do and imagine them in all the same ways, maybe in a different form, because cars look different at that point. But we're talking about something universe changing or transformative in so many different ways that I don't think that any other age has experienced what we are steamrolling towards.
You may well be right, and I'm just excited. I'm excited to see what happens because I'm also very optimistic. I kind of agree with the cautious optimism, but I'm also very gung-ho for this.
I wouldn't say a strong proponent, but I'm not averse to chaos. And I think that's where we're headed right now. I think there's a lot of things going on that we just are out of control. And I think that applies to economics and political systems, and I think that so many of us are so overwhelmed with the amount of input and change that's happening in our day-to-day lives. I see people all the time in my work life, my personal life, that are overcome with so much change that's happening around them that they can't keep up anymore. And I don't know if anybody, it's like, and don't think I'm a doom and gloom guy when I say this, but I think the world is spiraling out of control, but we're all too busy to notice it because we're so dizzy from it.
But haven't philosophers been saying that since forever?
Have they?
Isn't this just their perception of the technological increase, the exponential increase, and they just can't wrap their brains around it? I mean, you and I can think, into the future where this technological singularity happens. We can kind of have a picture, at least a rough estimate, and I think some people have reached the point where they can't hold it all in their heads.
I think that's true, but I don't know if that disputes the point. I think that the amount of inputs we have, the amount of outputs we have, the amount of power we have to store and retrieve information is at a point where it's becoming bewildering to all the people that are involved with it. And I don't think that's ever been the case in history.
I think it's been the case for all of history. We talked about using tools to create the next line of tools. Well, we're raising generations to create the next generations. And I think the kids who are growing up now are going to be the ones who have no trouble processing what we're feeling right now. Even though, for us to think of this technological singularity is unfathomable. I think they're going to look at it and be like, oh yeah, that happened on, July 1st.
I do see your point, but I don't agree, Brian, because the human brain, its capacity for learning and creativity, has been relatively stable since early Neanderthal times. We're not evolving new senses, new capabilities to process information and store it. Those things are wetware, but that doesn't change exponentially. As a matter of fact, it pretty much it does it. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a doctor. But as I understand it, there is a more linear progression in the capabilities of our wetware, our biological chemical systems. If there is progression at all until there's an extinction level event or something that forces evolution. And I'm not an evolutionary. I'm not a scholar in any of these things, but I believe that's true.
Oh yeah, we're just two guys with microphones.
When we have one generation spawn another generation, that generation is not much, if any, more capable of handling information than the previous generation. Now, there's more information out there, and I think that's what I'm talking about is the amount of information external to us is increasing exponentially, where our evolutionary process is not increasing our capabilities exponentially.
Well, I just want to make a point for the math nerds listening out there that the evolution we see in our cells, biological evolution, it could actually be exponential. But whereas Moore's law is talking about technological evolution and we're talking about human evolution, it's approaching vertical, but we're still accelerating exponentially, but it's so virtually shallow of an angle that it appears linear or non-changing. I'm splitting hairs here, but
no, you're right.
Math geeks out there, get off my case.
No, you're right. And maybe we do. And maybe each evolutionary jump we make is an exponential increase. But we don't make those jumps but once every 80,000 years. I'm just throwing a number out there. 80,000 is probably more like 8 million.
Yeah, well, it's not close to 2.5.
Right, it's not close to 2.5. So there's this thing, which is technology, which controls everything in the civilized world, which is increasing exponentially, while we are at this near or the same level as we were 1,000, 10,000 years ago.
That's not actually true, since you're a fucking cyborg. You said we haven't created new senses, yet you can sense magnetic fields, as can I. So that's a big jump. That's a big jump from somebody born 50 years ago.
You're absolutely right, Brian. And actually, that's actually that's actually the reason I started down this whole path with being cyborg, is because I think, and I think Ray Kurzweil, you guys will have to look him up if you don't know him, and I think Ray Kurzweil agrees with this in his writings. The only way, and maybe the best way, that we're going to be able to cope with this situation is to integrate technology deeper, to become part of the technology, so that we, as well as the technology, can develop exponentially. And that's the reason I really got into transhumanism. That's the reason I'm all in cyborg.
I'm down with that. I know you're down with that. I think most of our listeners are too.
Thank you for listening. We'd like to invite our listeners to email us at twociborgs@twincityplus.org. That's twociborgs@twincitiesplus.org. We'll keep that email address working for a while longer.
We have the hooded sweatshirts with the Two Cyborgs logo. You can get it in black, white, and heather gray. Support our podcast and look fabulous doing it. This is Brian McAvoy.
And this is Tim Shank. You have been listening to Two Cyborgs and a Microphone, brought to you by two cyborgs who coincidentally have microphones.
Like, follow, share, +1, and don't forget to subscribe on any of our popular podcast services, including Google Play Music, iTunes, and Stitcher. Help us move up that podcast ladder by subscribing and commenting on iTunes. You really can't understand how much commenting helps. It shows that we're popular.
I like being popular.